What are the biggest question marks in college football? I'll rephrase that. This is a better way for us to start this segment. College football in the 2024 season is going to have a lot of wild things happen. We already know that. We already understand that. But I thought it'd be appropriate for us as a college football community to unpack some of the major what-ifs that this sport has to offer. And what-ifs and all these questions we're asking right now, yes, they impact the team specifically, but I think these questions that we're going to ask and these potential scenarios that could happen are specific to these teams that will then impact the landscape of college football. They'll send a ripple effect across college football that will change the game as we see it. So, first what if that I think would have a massive impact on college football. What if Ole Miss wins the SEC? Now, according to FanDuel, they have plus 650 odds to win the conference. And yes, it would mean they probably beat a team like a Georgia, like a Alabama, like a LSU, like a Texas to win the conference. And it would mean a couple of things. One, it would mean that we probably got some really epic moments from Lane Kiffin, like the sound bites that he would give us in that kind of run, I'm sure would be off the charts. At the very least, some really pithy Twitter moments for us. Jackson Dart, probably in the Heisman conversation. They win the SEC. Who's to say he doesn't win that whole darn thing? But I think the massive impact and the ripple effect, if Ole Miss wins the SEC, forget the national championship. If they win the SEC, we will rethink how we view building a roster in college football. I've said this a lot about Ole Miss. I draw the comparison a lot to Roger Bannister when he broke that 4-minute mile barrier. For those of y'all that are unfamiliar, Roger Bannister, the first man to run a mile under 4 minutes. Prior to that, the thought was if you run a mile under 4 minutes, the human body, the human heart will explode. You will die. It can't be done. Same thing is being thought right now when it comes to the transfer portal. Yeah, you can use the portal. You can have some pieces that you add to your roster and be able to be successful that way, but you can't win a real conference championship that way in the SEC. You can't go win a national championship that way. If Lane Kiffin goes out and wins a conference title in the toughest conference in college football with taking 20 transfers each of the last 2 years, they will have shattered that glass ceiling and they will have broken that 4-minute mile barrier. Now, the national championship conversation is a whole other piece in itself, but the ripple effect would be even more massive if Ole Miss were to go out and win a national title. But I think the SEC specifically is the conversation I want to have around Ole Miss because all the things I just said, the difficulty of winning that conference, the teams you would have to go through, and the way they've built their rosters. Georgia, they use the portal, but not the same way Ole Miss does. Same thing with Alabama, same thing with Texas. They'll definitely use the portal, but it's not something that they necessarily rely on to the same degree as Lane Kiffin and those folks out there in Oxford. Teams have done it in the ACC. We saw Florida State do it, but to do it in the SEC, I think it'd be a game changer. And I think you'd have a lot of folks, a lot of personnel departments across college football kind of reevaluate how they build their roster and if they need to lean more heavily on the portal. Another big what if here. What if Notre Dame doesn't just make the college football playoff, but they make an actual run in the college football playoff? I'm talking like they end up winning 2 or 3 games in that thing and find themselves in the national title game or in that semifinal game. It would obviously be massive for Marcus Freeman. Like that would be even further validation for the people in South Bend that made the move to hire Marcus Freeman as the head coach when he was extremely young and for everything that he's built and everything that he's challenged to push the envelope there. And that's huge. Like Notre Dame as a whole would be extremely excited. That fan base would be fired up, be great for them. I think what would be even more impactful for Notre Dame, should they make a college football playoff run, the major impact for me is what happens optically to Notre Dame. Because I think right now it is sort of an unspoken feeling across the high school recruiting level that Notre Dame, story program, massive brand, but if you want to go achieve your goals, if you want to go achieve your dreams and play for a national championship and things like that, well, you got to go to SEC school. You got to go to one of those big boys in the Big Ten. If Notre Dame goes on that kind of run and they remove that sort of veil that people have over their face when they're viewing Notre Dame, I think it would pour gasoline on their recruiting efforts. Their recruiting efforts have been solid the last couple of years. Had a number 11 class in 24, had a top 10 class in 23, currently a top 5 class in 2025. But if they're able to make a deep playoff run, I think folks would have a lot more confidence in signing up to go play in South Bend, to go play for Marcus Freeman. And I think they make that jump from solid to borderline elite when it comes to those final recruiting rankings during National Signing Day. And that's kind of the difference maker right now for Notre Dame in my mind. Got a lot of really good players, got a really good staff. But if they want to compete for national titles consistently, it's going to take a top 5 class and a top 3 class and a couple of classes stacked on top of each other to get it done. So in my mind, if you make a deep playoff run, change the optics around Notre Dame, I think the optics for recruits would change drastically, and the recruiting rankings for Notre Dame would also change drastically. Here's a big one here. What if Florida and Billy Napier win the state this year? So I'm talking Florida, that first game of the year when Miami comes to the Swamp, they beat them, and they finish the year with a win at Doak Campbell against Florida State. Now, the conversation probably goes to, well, what's the rest of their record? Because they still have a Hunger Games schedule, JD. I understand that. Just ride with me here when it comes to this thought that they could win the whole state. The first is the vibes internally would be massive in Gainesville. If you're able to beat Florida State and Miami, the feeling is, okay, this is going somewhere. Like we've heard the last couple of years about how it's a job that you're having to rebuild and kind of tear down some old practices and get some bad out to get some good in. It's a process, and we've heard that, but now we actually see some real return on investment. Also worth noting, Florida State and Miami, they're viewed right now to be, I think, both college football playoff contenders and definitely the top of the ACC. I think the big thing here is if Florida is going to beat Florida State and beat Miami, and let's say that those are 2 wins in a 6-6 season. 6-6 to me, you're having a little bit of a conversation where you're not sure what happens next with Billy Napier. Because 6-6 is a 1-win improvement from the year before. It's the same record you had going into your bowl game in year 1. Like you're kind of a little bit, I think, not sure what to make of it. But if you have 2 wins over your in-state rivals, obviously it helps recruiting. It helps the way that recruits view Florida long-term. But also I think it's kind of that benefit of the doubt. Because again, Florida right now is viewed in most college football circles as the 3rd best team, depending on who you ask around how they feel about UCF, maybe the 4th best team in the state of Florida. I personally think that they could erase all that doubt if they were to go and beat Miami and Florida State this upcoming season. So optically, would be massive for Billy Napier. I think it would buy him another year, if we're going to be honest, and I think it gives him that benefit of the doubt when it comes to that 6-6 season. Also worth noting, if you beat Miami and Florida State, I don't think you have a 6-6 record. I think you are probably good enough to get somewhere in that 7-8 win category. If they win 8 games, Billy Napier is keeping his job, even with how ridiculous that schedule is. Last what if for you. What if Auburn beats Alabama in Bryant-Denny and wins the Iron Bowl? Think about how we viewed the Alabama-Auburn rivalry over the course of the last, 15 or so years. The thought has always been, well, we know who Alabama is. If it's in Jordan-Hare, weird things happen, like Auburn might be able to win a game that way. And I'm not saying that Auburn's never won at Bryant-Denny. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is right now, with how we view Auburn and Alabama, our opinions of both of those schools going forward is more malleable than it has ever been. Like, we don't know what Auburn's going to be long-term. We definitely don't know what Alabama's going to be long-term with someone new at the helm in 17 years with Kalen DeBoer running the show. Like, we don't know with either of those schools just yet. And so if Auburn, in Kalen DeBoer's first year, Hugh Freeze and co. go into Tuscaloosa and get a dub, I think you're looking at Hugh Freeze and saying, whoa, they're doing something out there. Because last year there was kind of some, that they came close against Georgia, really should have beat Alabama on the final play, didn't get it done. And it's a talking point of hope, right? Well, there's no hope if you actually do it in Bryant-Denny this year. There's no hoping. It's, okay, now we're doing. Now it's happening. And you're saying, okay, Auburn, are they the team in Alabama? Are they the team in the state of Alabama? It's hard to argue against that if they just beat Alabama at their place. And I think also, as I said with a lot of these things, the optics and the way it impacts recruiting, think about how many times we've seen Auburn and Alabama be the last 2 hats for a 4 or 5-star kid on National Signing Day. Happens a fair amount. But if Hugh Freeze can make that extra pitch and say, well, we did beat Alabama this year at Alabama, you pick who you want to play for. I think that recruiting sales pitch would be a massive, massive feather in the cap for Hugh Freeze. And I think that could really start to change the tide, no pun intended, for the direction of Auburn football and their ability to acquire talent. So we'll keep an eye on all these what-ifs, but those are just a few of the what-ifs that I think could change the college football landscape here in the near future. What if Ole Miss wins the SEC? What if Notre Dame makes a playoff run? What if Florida beats Florida and Florida, or what if Florida beats Florida State and Miami to win the state of Florida? And what if Auburn beats Alabama in Bryant-Denny to win the Iron Bowl? It's all just what ifs right now, but the beautiful part about college football is we will actually get to see all these things come to fruition, or all these things not come to fruition. One way or the other, we'll get an answer in the 2024 season. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.